Thank you, Mark. So some of the things that Mark talked about for the vision for the region, from the center, from Waterbury, we want to make those connections in every direction. BRT versus rail is a discussion that we're having. The Waterbury branch line is important, and we want to see those rail improvements. The region prefers to see the establishment of the Devon station that Mark described. It's really a transfer point, so that the Waterbury branch, which is not planned to be electrified, can continue to run as a diesel shuttle back and forth between those points, providing service to the main line and meeting as many trains as possible, frankly as many as the DOT can afford to pay Metro North to meet. There was an earlier discussion about double tracking and bypass tracking. In the Waterbury and New Canaan branch line study that was done several years ago, the difference in headways on trains for the two options was only about 6 minutes. So from a cost basis, the bypass tracking made much more sense. It really didn't gain us much. We probably wouldn't schedule that many trains where double tracking would be necessary. For the other routes that aren't served by rail today, and this brings up the Central Connecticut Rail Corridor, the connection from Waterbury across to Bristol, actually to Berlin, it goes on the Berlin Secondary. I think that's a question that we need to define further. Whether that line can accommodate commuter rail, it would certainly be our hope, and it's what we support as a primary objective. But we may want to look at BRT service to Bristol. Right now we have express service on CT Fast Track from Waterbury to New Britain, and you have to backtrack to Bristol to get there. Direct BRT service, full BRT service from Waterbury to Bristol and on to New Britain would be preferable on that system. The other one that's really important for us, I think, is to get to Danbury. We have probably the second most requests after Bristol and Berlin is bus service or any service between Waterbury and Danbury. Right now it's only the private bus lines, Peter Pan and I forget the other provider, who travel back and forth between that point. There's the construction of a new campus in the community college system between the Naugatuck+Valley Community College that I believe is being established in the Danbury area. The ability to move people back and forth on that corridor for educational purposes and for commuting purposes is very, very important to us. And then lastly, as Mark said, we're going to be kicking off the Route 8 corridor study, which is going to look at BRT from the Naugatuck Valley to get to those job centers in Shelton and Trumbull down to the Bridgeport station, because in that whole Route 8 corridor, there really is no commuting option. You have to drive your car to get there. So those are the things that we've been looking at and the things that are important to us. As I said, we're gonna sort of skip over the panel discussion and go right to Q&A from the audience. So at this point, if there are any questions for any of the panelists on any of the items they proposed or any of the items I discussed, happy to take them at this time. Is there any? Do we have any? I can't really see, so. We have one here.
Yeah, so this is a question for Joe. In terms of attracting the younger workforce and highlighting the creation of these new communities that Naugatuck, Waterbury, and other towns are working on, how do we get that message out to the young people that we want to attract?
Well, you know, it's interesting. If you look at Stamford, 20 years ago, the south end of Stamford was basically Pitney Bowes' headquarters, manufacturing, an older community without much reinvestment in the south end of Stamford. Now you have apartment buildings. We have 10,000 people living in downtown Stamford, all under the age of 35. And partly it's jobs, but partly we have 5 young people 30 and under working in our office. Only one of them owns a car, which really surprised me, because when I was 16, I couldn't wait to get a car, right? By 18, you had to have a car. And here they're 30, and they don't have a car. And there's something shifting here where younger people want to be connected. They're connected into Manhattan or into New Haven or Stamford. And there's a lifestyle in which there are restaurants and bars and activities that really are important to that group. So partly there are, I mean, here's what's interesting. In Stamford and all that new development in the South End, less than 50% of the people in those apartment buildings are working in Stamford. You know, there's about 25% that actually commute into the city or commute into New Haven or Fairfield or Westport. So there's a choice among young people about living in cities. And I'll just make a comment on that. You know, when I started kind of doing economic development work, both in Washington, but also I worked at People's Bank for 12 years on quote-unquote the rebuilding of Bridgeport. We at that time in the 70s and 80s, we were seeing enormous loss of population in cities like Bridgeport, New Haven, Hartford. Even Stamford wasn't growing. That's reversed. Stamford is what is now the second largest city in the state, I believe, which is extraordinary from where it started. Hartford has shrunk. Bridgeport's growing again. New Haven is growing again. So there's been a switch. People are moving back into urban environments. Now, the problem is our property tax system and the structure of Connecticut finance discourages urban growth. But if you look at where companies are locating, they're locating in Stamford, not up in the corporate industrial parks anymore. It's all around the train station. And around the train station is where all the housing is developed, in the downtown. So there's a quality of life issue here in which cities can grow again. That's an extraordinary thing. We don't realize that. You know, Connecticut was the land of suburban living, and now our growth is occurring in cities. That's the shift, and it's a quality of life issue. The question you can say is, well, these millennials, when they hit 35 and they're married with 2 kids, are they really going to want to live in a city, or do they want to move out to the suburbs? We'll see. In Brooklyn right now, one of the really funny problems is what do they do with strollers? Because now young people are staying in Brooklyn, getting married, having families, and what are the shopkeepers, and what do you do with all these strollers? We've never had these before. So it's kind of a funny thing, but it's telling you there's a shift. So as you build supermarkets, as you build schools back in urban areas, if they're good schools, you've got a really attractive environment for younger people. They like an urban environment. So there's a cultural shift going on.
Thank you, Joe. So, looks like these gentlemen were so good. Oh, we do have a question. Thank you.
Hi, actually, 2 questions. One for Joe, one perhaps for David. Joe, you mentioned that you were very much in favor of rail.
Yeah.
What is your opinion on reestablishing passenger service from Norwalk to Pittsfield up on the Housatonic line? And then I have a question for David, if I can pass on. With the development of the new Tappan Zee Bridge, do you think it was a missed opportunity not to have a rail corridor on that bridge? Thank you.
Thank you.
Just on the Tappan Zee, you know, I don't think people realize this. The piers are being built for the rail. I don't know if that's understood, but on that bridge, there are piers being put in place below the water at which when they're ready to do the rail, if and when, they can just pop it right out. So that's interesting to know. I discovered that about 2 months ago. So on the issue of the Housatonic, I don't know. I'm just so focused on the Danbury line, the Waterbury line, the New Haven line. Just to be honest, I'm very familiar with it. We've met with people about it. I don't know. I don't want to give you an answer on that. I'm just not sure.
Thank you, Joe. So David, do you want to talk a little bit about the routing options and whether it happens?
I mean, in today's day and age where rail is coming back and transit is so important, any opportunity to combine highway and rail is a good one. And it is a shame on the Tappan Zee that it got left out. It's good to know the piers are there. The governor of New York just recently announced interest in a bridge from Long Island to Connecticut. I grew up near Rye, New York, so I knew all about, spent my childhood with the Rye Oyster Bay Bridge thing. But if you're going to build something like that, certainly a rail connection along there would make a lot of sense. So I think, you know, money is these projects have gotten so incredibly expensive But where we can be smart about it, we ought to be, even if there's no rail plan for either side of those bridges, put the capability to put it in, because once it's built, no one will ever get back to building it for another 100 years. So.
Are we good? I think we're all set. Gentlemen, you did such a good job presenting. There are no questions. You've explained everything thoroughly. Thank you very much.